Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got this bin over here that I'd like to check in on today. And, last time we checked in on this system, we were busy using a container like this one, or maybe it was this one right here, collecting up worms out of this system, as many adults as we could find, to transport them. And the place that we moved them to isn't even visible here because the system that we threw them into was actually running in this now vacant container. And it was sitting right here, so what really happened was the worms that were living in that green tub now live in this slightly larger container. They were moved over a few days ago, and we usually feed these two together since they are kind of joined. It was not only that one time 10 days ago that we moved worms over, there was 2 other times, so on 3 occasions we've hijacked some of the adult worms, or actually as many as we could find in each case, and moved them over. And at this point, this system is over 100 days old, maybe 108 days old, I believe. And this one here is somewhere in the 50s, maybe 58 or so. I don't remember, but that's their rough ages. I think as far as feedings go, I believe that today this is going to be receiving its 14th feeding, and I believe over here there's been 7, maybe this is the 8th feeding of this container. So we're going to get these up onto the bench and get them fed today. What I've got for them is in these bags and over here in this tray with the filters and the coffee and some tea bags and a variety of things over here. So let's get the first bin out here. There's usually this kind of forced order requiring us to start in the older systems so we can recruit worms and then release them into here, but since there's nothing like that on the agenda today, we can sort of break form and begin with the younger of the 2 systems. Now, this plastic was really just the covering when the system was still running in the smaller container. It's a narrower strip of plastic, and since it just kind of belonged with this batch of worms, it didn't really go anywhere. It just stayed with the worms. You see a lot of moisture collecting right beneath this plastic. This plastic is on here pretty snug around the edges, not allowing for a great deal of airflow. It's really locking in the dampness of the system. I guess with all the extraction of worms out of the other system to populate this system, and with this system recently getting upgraded to this larger space, with all these special jobs during each check-in, it seemed like it would be nice to have a somewhat routine everyday sort of check-in today, which would consist of nothing more than the bin getting fed. There appears to be a nice level of dampness in here, which is not too surprising. I did use a good amount of liquid to try to moisten all of this fresh stuff that you see on the very bottom. I had just shredded a whole bunch of paper, threw it in here without kind of letting it sit or prime or whatever you want to call it. It's not that nice aged bedding that I usually use. I just figured I would use whatever. Some quickly thrown together freshly shredded paper, and it was right on top of that bed of fresh paper, dampened fresh paper, that I placed the contents of the green tub, which is all this darker stuff on top. And I think we did attempt to just kind of leave things more or less situated the way they came out. Other than spreading the stuff out, everything sort of stayed where it was. So the feeding, even though it had been originally placed 10 days ago into the green tub to feed this population, and now that it's actually been moved over to here, its position relative to the rest of the contents is down the middle, and it still is down the middle. So we've got a number of good-sized worms in here. It's pretty funny though. I did actually have a secret video that I had posted of the last time I extracted worms, recruiting worms for this system here. I had put a little card inside of my last video a card that'll link you out to a slow speed, regular natural speed clip of me doing that last recruit of worms, so that it's really easy to see how many worms I recruited. And that'll enable me to slowly count them one by one and come up with a pretty good estimate for how many the third haul of worms consisted of. But when I look at the views on that video, it shows 0. So nobody looked at that card. Nobody linked out to the video to see what that was. Nobody provided any input on how many additional worms were added last time to this system. So I've got my own number in my head. I think I might have even made reference to it recently as far as how it plays into the total number of worms that I estimate that I've got in here. So even though I just pretty much gave this system, almost as much fresh bedding as there was material in here already, I'm not going to go skimpy. I'm just going to keep going, do the routine of taking some of my prepared bedding this time, only a few days after upgrading these worms with almost like a full tub worth of fresh bedding. So we're going to plop in a little bit of fresh stuff as the foundation for today's feeding, since I've got a whole tub of it ready to go. And then in can come some of the stuff that we have here. What you normally see me feeding with around here is coffee. It's pretty much the every feeding stuff. But you're going to see here some tea bags today too. A little deviation. Don't have much background or experience with the composting of tea bags, so it's funny how in all these years I might have done it once or twice, but I barely remember if I did. So whatever, we're going to throw a few of these tea bags into this system today. And since it's only a 50 some odd day old system, we'll have plenty of time to watch the progress. I'm curious to see if these are bags that'll get nibbled away by the worms or not. Sometimes I see people actually pulling out tea bags from their systems because the bags themselves don't get broken down. Okay, the foods. Gotta get the bags now. Get the food in here. This bag appears to have potato and Brussels sprouts? Maybe? I don't know. I guess I'll try to hold half of it in the bag and let the other half slide out. Oh, now we got a good view of it. That's exactly what it is. Just what I thought. Almost seems like they don't even need more, but I've also got some pumpkin that I've got to get rid of. So, got one more piece, and that should be an even split so that both systems get an equal amount of food, about or thereabouts. So before we sprinkle in that last of that coffee, why don't we sprinkle in a little bit of crushed eggshell too as grit. Now, since we've got ourselves a nice fresh coffee filter over here that we could use as our replacement top covering indicator to show where we last fed, we can take the old one that was doing that job and include it with today's feeding as a little bit of surplus bedding type material for them to eat. I don't even know, I guess we'll sprinkle the coffee right on top of that. We'll see how it goes. Alright. Now, like we do sometimes, I guess we'll go a little bit slower on getting things covered up. Take a little detour so we can check how things on the edges look. But you know what? I forgot. There's not going to be much to see because my typical method of doing that is to scoop down low and try to bring out what's at the very bottom. But what's at the very bottom is still kind of uncharted territory for these worms. I don't think they've ventured into that stuff quite yet, so there's not much to see. But I guess there's no harm in me sort of tilling it up a little bit and helping it to blend in with some of the surrounding materials now that there's been a couple days for the stuff to get acclimated and soak in some of the local juices and everything. So that actually looks pretty good. Why don't we do the same on this other side? Once again, not because it's giving us much of a view of what's happening, because there's not much happening Nothing to be seen here. But here too, I guess I'm encountering a couple clumps of paper that seem to have wadded together, which also benefit from a little bit of getting broken up and stirred in with some of the nearby materials. So I got a feeling that this bin is going to start doing really nice. Now that we've given them some additional space to roam around in, quite a bit actually. Between all the fresh bedding that the entire contents of the system were placed on top of, in addition to the nice portion that they were given as part of their feeding, as sort of a foundation for their food that they got today. There's a good amount of bedding floating around in here for them to enjoy and to spread out into. So let's get this thing covered up. I think we're pretty much done here. So I made reference to the dubious distinction of something being the feeding zone indicator. For me, it's just sort of a little cheesy tradition to have something marking where we last fed. And I guess we'll use this coffee filter to do that. And the other coverings that we had that we're going to replace, we're not going to put that little plastic back on top here. I'll just set that aside, put that away. But all the other things that we found draped over the top surface can go back. Sometimes the way these pieces of paper lay down next to each other, it's a little bit difficult to figure out what's what. And let's see if we can spread this out. I can't remember how it was, but it feels like I could do it this way and get a good sort of maximum coverage surface area covered with paper here. Stuff will get soaked the way it did previously, and maybe we'll even see some worms hanging out on it for a change. I was a little surprised that we didn't see any hanging out on it, because usually when the paper gets really wet like that, being right beneath the plastic, it becomes a spot that the worms really enjoy hanging out in. So I don't know, I don't think it's too out of the ordinary. Nothing to be worried about as far as I'm concerned, hopefully. But just a little observation. Sometimes I wonder why I see things happening sometimes, but not other times. All right, let's go get the other bin, get them fed too. Now in this system, I don't remember. Something tells me we didn't have this plastic covering here. For some reason I thought it might help, so I put it on here in addition to the bubble wrap. I'm at a loss as for why I did this. It's a little unusual, but I must have had a reason. Maybe I'll have to watch the video from last time to sort that out. Perhaps I felt like the outer edges were not getting sufficient coverage from this bubble wrap, and that's why I thought that if I were to put that slightly larger top covering, which is also, I guess, plastic and won't allow condensation to escape through it, and it's pretty much doing the same job as this, but with slightly better coverage. And over here in this case we do have one little worm that seemed interested in checking out the moisture, and this little guy I guess got a little bit more than he bargained for with this pretty good sized puddle out here in the middle of the container. On top of this paper, all that moisture that would have just vaporized. It would have just been lost to the atmosphere, and probably even more than just what we see here, probably a whole lot more than what we're seeing here. So sometimes it seems worthwhile to have something in there preventing the evaporation of this stuff in the bin. But sometimes when a bin looks like it can handle holding on to the moisture that's in it without the help of plastic, a lot of times I'll try to wean the system off using plastic for that purpose. Here I wonder if that might be the case. Even in the other system seemed like it had a good amount of moisture in it too. I wonder if we would maybe benefit from switching coverings here to something that's a little bit more capable of allowing some airflow, as opposed to the plastic, which allows pretty much none. Right away I could see, just from the amount of material in the system, how close it is to the rim already. For a system that's only 100 days old, I would usually only be at the point where maybe I'd be giving it its 10th, 9th, 10th feeding or so. I think that's just a rough estimate, but here we're on feeding 14 already, and I've been super generous with the bedding lately in all my systems, and I think that shows here too, because the system's just, you know, almost overflowing at this point. And a lot of times I use the 150-day age as sort of my rough target for getting a system completed. And I think I think in this case approaching capacity might be the reason as opposed to its age. Oh, brother. Oh, I even managed to get a little bit into my collection of grit. Gotta clean up my mess. Perhaps I'll keep my grip covered until we need it. So I'll just try to be a little bit more careful here. I've got these, it was some sort of a big stick or something over here that the end of it was so long and far away from where I was tilling up the material that it sort of just got jammed and created a little like catapult. Sent a bunch of material flying. And you know, even what I'm doing here, just this aeration of the material, kind of tilling it up and loosening it up. I think it was this one here. It seems like it's even expanding. I feel like I'm approaching the rim even more just from having tilled up this little bit of material here. So, man, it really makes me wonder if I want to include bedding with today's feeding, because it just seems like the stuff is very richly and densely mixed with lots and lots of bedding type materials. There's certainly no shortage in this bin of bedding. The weird thing though is that I'm not seeing any worms out on the edges. I mean, maybe I did see one or two worms, you know, here and there I'm bouncing into one. And I guess that's almost by design, because if our job over the past 3 haul outs has been to extract as many adult worms as we can find and relocate them, then maybe what I need to be looking for in here is much smaller little worms. Because, you know, when I first received this package of worms, when I got the sticker on the same day, these worms were huge. All the worms. I mean, you saw them in the other bin when we fed them. And just to see no really big worms in here seems odd, because that's what I populated the bin with. But I've been following this method, which is meant to distance the adult worms from the babies. And after a certain period of time, it was the probably a pretty good sound assumption that the adults populating this material had all along been dropping cocoons left and right in the material, sort of setting the stage for a little bit of a population boom. So in preparation for that, the adults have been gradually relocated, kind of turning this into the nursery bin where all the cocoons are being left time to hatch and all the babies are going to have a good amount of stuff to roam around in and to eat. Because, you know, we saw lots and lots of bedding as we probed around. But there's also got to be good amounts of, you know, leftover food mixed in as well. Although, you know, when it comes to these African nightcrawlers, you would have to assume that a lot of bedding is what they would, in a lot of cases, even prefer over other things as their food source. Here's a mango seed, 1 or 2 little worms hanging out on it. I think the feeding last time was very similar to this. I think there were pumpkin bits, coffee added. But you know, after 10 days, it's not too surprising to see no leftovers. I didn't see any traces of orange or, you know, the peel or the skin of the pumpkin when we fed the other bin. And after 10 days, you would like to think that it probably got eaten. this could very well be it. It's almost like a see-through material. Maybe what was beneath it was orange and has been eaten. Or maybe it's some other food, I can't tell. It just seems like a paper-thin sheet of something, and there almost does seem to be a hint of orange on it. It's got to be the leftover pumpkin, but just a very, very thin, almost see-through outer skin of it. It's amazing how they nibble away what they can, and then eventually take care of all of it when they can. But I don't know if we're going to find much more than that as far as leftovers go. Gosh, this almost seems like a system that I should transform into just a almost like a nursery type environment. Maybe come through here one last time to try to round up worms. You know, down here where we fed, where the food was, now we're finally bumping into some worms, and a lot of them are small, but we can still once in a while, you know, encounter a good size adult worm that would be a good candidate for being relocated over with the rest of the adults, and then maybe leave this system to gradually grow in numbers until such a time that we've got a whole new generation here spawned off from the original adult group. Or at least you'd have to assume that you were pretty thorough if you went through multiple extractions and, you know, did a good, honest job trying to pull them all out. And I don't even know. I don't know how long it would take for a worm to reach like full size. I wouldn't even know if it was one that I missed on the first go around or one that already, you know, was born here but grew to that large size really quickly. I suppose that might be a possibility here soon too. It's been over 100 days now. And I don't know exactly how long it takes to go from totally newborn to full-size large adult. But I think we're probably in that ballpark or thereabouts. I just feel so, I don't know, I just feel like I'm going to push this stuff over the edge. I want to be so careful with it. I mean, I'm questioning putting in bedding, but it's so tempting too. No, you know, I think I'm going to see what I could do about maybe grabbing some of these leftover bits of food and stuff, placing them back down into the middle area. And I'm going to skip the addition of bedding in this bin today. Just remarkable how close to being full this thing seems. And to say they're getting no bedding is almost incorrect too, because what we'll do is we will hang on to this coffee filter right here to indicate where we last fed and place it across the top like we did in the other bin. And what we could do is we can grab the old filter that we'd been using previously to become bedding with today's feeding. Not a lot, but still a little boost to their bedding. And on top of that, we could place in all of these delicious morsels, knowing that we've sort of insulated any worms that might be right below it from the frigid cold by putting down a little bit of a barrier. Somehow this stuff always seems like more when it's in the kitchen, when you're sorting the stuff out of the freezer to bring it down here, but once it's in the bin, it never seems like it's that much food. Or is that just me? I'm sure others experience the same thing. So I think it's going to be pretty interesting to see, you know, how over time we've gradually depopulated all the adults from this system to the best of our ability. And the next generation is just sort of coming up from behind and taking over here. And it's a good thing. It's good that the system is seemingly overflowing in spare bedding. it might make good sense at some point just to let this system go for a while. Let the worms really attack all this stuff here. All the little baby worms coming online are, going to be voraciously hungry and should do a really nice job focusing their attention on whatever they can, which would be, just the existing materials in the system. And then we probably end up with some really beautiful castings before we, would have to relocate those little guys into another space. Just a mango seed husk. I'm going to just sort of stick it down there where the rest of the food is. Get it submerged. So I just got to be a little bit careful here. I'm usually taken care of by having a good side wall around me, so I can kind of brush things left and right all over the place and not worry about making a mess. But here it does seem like I could very, very easily push things right over the edge because we're so close to capacity in here. It is a little bit crazy. Oh, and you can tell too from the weight of it. It's pretty heavy. So I think I'm going to just treat the abundance of moisture in this system as something that we observed, but something we don't necessarily need to, react to. Whatever the reason was, I must have felt like the increased coverage that this provides versus the somewhat lesser coverage that this provides was needed. But is it? I don't know. It's a good question because we do have a tremendous amount of moisture in here, and perhaps something that does actually permit a little bit of airflow around it and under it would be to our benefit, allowing this extremely damp stuff to perhaps shed a little bit of its moisture to evaporation. So why don't we treat the use of this as just a temporary thing that happened since the last feeding up until today, and that whatever it is that we thought it would do to help has worked, and now we're going to go back to the way it was prior. I don't know. That's what it seems like I should do. So I'm going to go for it that way. Alright everyone, that's it for today's video. I've got a little bit of stuff on my hands here. I usually try to keep this hand clean so that I can give you guys a nice clean thumbs up at the end. No, it's really so I can control my camera without making a mess. But either way, that's the end of the video. I just wanted to really quickly say before I go, thank you. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.